It's argued that whistleblowing plays a vital role in exposing injustice in society. But of course, this often comes at a personal cost to the individuals involved. Whilst high-profile cases in recent years have increased the saliency of these issues in the public consciousness, there are still limited channels through which individuals can voice their ethical concerns. So let's join former FBI Special Agent and former Minneapolis Division Legal Counsel Coleen Rowley, campaigner and former UK Care Assistant Eileen Chubb, and the director and founder of Disruption Network Lab, Tatiana Bazzichelli, as they explore with Annie Machon how blowing the whistle can preserve the integrity and well-being of society.
Hello, my name is Annie Machon, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome Coleen Rowley, Tatiana Bazzichelli, and Eileen Chubb to the World Ethical Data Forum. Thank you all very much for joining us here today. Today we're going to be discussing the concept of whistleblowers, and the session is called The Regulators of Last Resort, which is how I always think of whistleblowing. We all have some experience, of course, in this field. Some of us have done it. Others have supported it, others support whistleblowers and campaign for better protections for them. But first of all, I'd like to invite all three of you to just let the audience know a little bit about your own personal experience and background in this. Perhaps speak for 5 minutes. And if we could kick off with, perhaps Coleen would like to start.
Sure. Well, I think I'm one of the more unusual whistleblowers because I was at least able to survive without going to prison and without even losing my retirement or getting fired, which actually is unfortunately the experience of most whistleblowers, and especially those in who are trying to tell the truth about a national security issue. So I was unfortunately able to see one of the big problems before 9/11, where a terrorist suspect who was in Minnesota and training to become a pilot wanted to learn to fly a super jet, and the flight instructors at his school had never seen someone so suspicious. He paid in cash. I mean, there were all these facts. He couldn't explain why he wanted to learn to fly a jet, other than he said it was an ego trip. They asked him some questions and he became nervous. So two of those instructors called the FBI separately. That's something that's not even known. And at that point, they landed on one of the agents in the office who was himself a pilot. He had been in the Navy, and also he was on the Joint Intelligence, one of the very first Joint Intelligence task forces. So this agent thought, that it was very suspicious, and he grabbed an INS agent, and they went out very quickly and interviewed him, they interviewed his actual flight instructor, who said most suspicious student we've ever had, and gave them even more reason to suspect that this guy Zacarias Moussaoui was up to something. Then they went and interviewed him and his friend, and they were even more suspicious. So in order to keep him from committing a terrorist act that night, and literally this is 24 hours after the call came in, they took him into INS custody, immigration, because his visa had lapsed. And at that point, then they tried to do some checking with both France and the UK. Unfortunately, Annie, the UK was really lame on this. They did not get back. But in France, in time at least, they didn't get back. But in France, the agent in the legal attaché ran it up the chain to the French authorities, who found out that Moussaoui had actually been working for a Chechen terrorist leader named Abu Khattab. So the agents spent day and night writing this up in a very long declaration in order to get an emergency FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant to search his belongings. Then this is where the problem was. All different, nobody shared the information. It stayed in one low level at our FBI headquarters, who argued with the agents literally for 3 weeks. And at one point, the agent actually said to FBI headquarters, "Don't you guys know this is a guy who could fly into the World Trade Center?" That was actually said in a telephone call. So the headquarters said, "Nah, it's not going to happen. Minnesota doesn't matter," this type of thing. So when 9/11 actually occurs and you see the buildings coming down, everyone says, "Oh my gosh, this is the guy." Of course, when they do the checks of his belongings, he ties up with the actual hijackers. Now, the worst part of it was I knew that these agents were tearing their hair out for 3.5 weeks. After 9/11, even the FBI director Mueller kept saying publicly, there was no way anyone knew anything. We had no clue about this. And basically, he was trying to exonerate the agencies and not tell the truth. And of course, the problem with that is that it's that you can't fix anything. If you understand what the problems were and you sweep it under the rug, none of those issues can be fixed. And largely 9/11 occurred because of a failure to share information. So Dick Cheney, the vice president, was fighting tooth and nail for any accountability for months and months and months. And eventually, after 8.5 months, they finally started to have the Joint Intelligence Committee inquiry. So I had a chance at that point to tell the truth, and I seized it. I wrote a memo, basically because I couldn't sleep because I knew this was so horrible. So I wrote this memo, and at the end of my debriefing by some of the staffers of the Joint Intelligence Committee, when they asked, "Is there anything else that you want to add?" By the way, we were minded. We weren't able to tell the truth. And other agents actually thought they had to lie because they were minded during this official inquiry. But in my case, I handed them my memo. And then it's a longer story than this, but I actually took the memo to the senators who were the heads, or not the heads, but they were in the asking questions in the Joint Intelligence Committee. And I also sent a copy to the director, and I gave a copy to the Office of Professional Responsibility. So in my case, because it was at least I had that connection to an official inquiry. I think that maybe was one of the things that helped. But I found out a couple of days later from people that were in the directors, listening to some of the directors, that they were going to fire me just for even sharing honest information about this lapse with our Senate intelligence committees, which you're supposed to have the right to do. And anyways, I was able to survive. The only problem is once you're a whistleblower, you really can't look back. You can't go back to that happy time. And I actually spoke out about the Iraq War as well. And I was very lucky to make it to retirement without being fired and without being, of course, prosecuted. So I actually also, this was kind of a double-edged sword because Time Magazine picked me as one of the whistleblowers, Time Persons of the Year in 2002. That's a long story as well. It was kind of a fluke that they did that. But that problem with that is it made a lot of people believe that if they blew the whistle on something, that they too could become, on the cover, and that they could survive, and that they would actually even get their 15 minutes of Warhol fame. So that was kind of a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. But bottom line is I told some truth. The problem is not a lot changed. 9/11 served as the pretext for all of these horrible things for 20 years now. Wars all over the place, all basically based on lies. And so I've had to suffer through all of these years of not having been able to really make any significant difference.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think this is a general theme for most whistleblowers, that no matter what they try or how they can survive, it's very, very difficult to effect meaningful change. On that note, I'd like to go to Eileen as well. Obviously coming out of a very different background, but facing the same sort of blockages and the same sort of issues. So perhaps if you could tell us your story as well.
It's a long story. I totally identify with what Coleen was saying there, because even though whistleblowers coming from all sectors, that there's common themes to the story. And I think the most the thing that does the most damage to the whistleblower is that they can't stop the wrongdoing, that they risked everything and that the wrongdoing has never been held to account. And that is so hard. I mean, in my own story, there were 7 of us in a Bupa care home. We were seeing widespread abuse, but we didn't know about each other because we all worked in different parts of the home. And we kept being told that action was going to be taken and so forth. And we realised at a certain point, we discovered about each other, and all of these people have been reporting abuse, and we went to social services. The guy that investigated it at the time, there was a regulator. We were very lucky. He actually upheld everything. He did a thorough investigation. However, he himself had to become a whistleblower after they told him to tone it down and not to uphold the abuse. So it was just like a vicious circle. And we were saddened beyond belief to see 2 years later the same home embroiled in another abuse scandal, and that the same people had gone on to harm other people. And, you know, you just can't, that's the hardest thing to live with for whistleblowers, is the fact that you did all that, but it wasn't enough. Since then, we were the first people to use the UK law, which pretty much told us, it actually states in the verdict, we hadn't considered the consequences to ourselves before we reported the abuse. So we decided, because it was the first case, to fight that tooth and nail. And we spent 3 years going through every system, and the Lord Chancellor nearly had a nervous breakdown because he didn't know what to say to me in the end, because we bombarded government, we petitioned Parliament, we had so many letters going up and down Whitehall from other people that we even had a response from agriculture and fisheries in the end, and it's got nothing to do with them. But we learned, I suppose I learned the political game, and I learned how to fight back, and I was a very quiet person. Since then, we've supported 9,200 plus whistleblowers and 6,000 family members who've lost someone because a whistleblower was ignored, or there was no one willing to speak out. So we're kind of seeing it from both sides. We're seeing what happens to the victims, and we're seeing what happens to the whistleblowers. And it's just grown into this massive body of evidence. And we're not popular, because we want a radical change in the law that would actually have at its heart the victims and the wrongdoing. And we want the wrongdoing addressed, because that's what whistleblowers want. And and also that they have a set time to act in every single situation. And some situations you get an hour to act. In other situations, you may get like several hours to act, but there's a paper trail all the way through. And it's the first law that we're fighting for, an inbuilt scrutiny system. It's not enough that there's investigation. We want a set of scrutiny safeguards all the way through to see what that investigation consisted of. I suppose every time I talk to a whistleblower, I'm immediately back to where I was when I was seeing that abuse. And it haunts me, and it will always haunt me, because I can honestly say I've seen evil, and I had no idea that evil existed until I worked in a care home, and it was my first job.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, there does seem to be a sort of similar theme through all sectors, be it health, or be it the government, or be it intelligence, or be it financial. And I think the theme that nothing ever changes is key, and we really need to get into that in the general discussion. Thank you very much. And Tatiana, it's wonderful to have you here. I know you're not a whistleblower yourself, but you have supported and given immense exposure to so many key whistleblowers. So effectively, you're a sort of whistleblower guardian angel. So thank you very much for joining us today. And do you want to tell us a little bit of how you got into doing this work and why you continue to do it?
Yes, thank you, Annie, and thank you for involving me in this discussion. Also, I think it's very difficult for me to follow after these statements of Coleen and Eileen, because I'm not a whistleblower, and of course the activities that I have been doing don't even compare to the courage that they had. But I think in our small perspective, we are also trying to do big, in the sense that we are actually trying to provide a platform of discussion and also of interaction about whistleblowing and with whistleblowers. Just to say a bit about my background, since the 90s, I've been working inside the fields of hacker culture and activism. And I founded the Disruption Network Lab in 2004 after working at Trasmediale Festival. And actually, this is also the time we met, Annie, because you were one of the people that I invited to speak at Trasmediale Festival in Berlin. And I want to mention that because it was for me a very important panel. I remember that together with you, there was also Bill Binney and Alexa O'Brien, and that was 2014, and was the time in which we were speaking about Edward Snowden. Also, we were commenting about the discourse of Chelsea Manning and her persecution because she was still in prison. And in that time, we were discussing all together what we could do. Unfortunately, I see that the situation didn't change really in better. Of course, now Chelsea Manning is not in prison anymore, but we also saw what happened with the grand jury recently that, of course, is making the situation not easy in terms of discussion. And we can see it with the situation of Julian Assange that is still in prison. So what we're trying to do at the Disruption Network Lab is to try to connect these dots through bringing together people that work with the discourse of hacker culture or social justice, whistleblowing, and investigative journalists, also lawyers. We try to work with the very diverse people and connect them. And we organize usually conferences in which the people can discuss with each other. And this for me is a very important point, because if we also speak about the discourse of isolation, the fact that whistleblowers are not really heard, as we just could see, then we really need to provide support and to provide a platform of discussion where these people can also connect with other people that do a similar work but different, but they share the same aims. And I think it's really in these construction of networks of trust that we can make the difference also in terms of social change, because we really need not to make whistleblowing considered as a form of treason, as to be considered as a form of civil rights. And we need to hear the voice of whistleblowers, especially also after they blow the whistle, because this is really the moment in which they get isolated. You know, they get a lot of exposition in media, but then when time passes, and is really the moment in which they get more isolated because maybe they cannot find a job, they don't have really a social situation of support, then the civil society gets completely silenced. So my perspective is really to try to provide this moment of sharing, of interaction, and how we call it the idea of trying to expose a system of power and injustice, also try to keep on going this discussion, try to understand what the whistleblowers did and why, and also inform the civil society in terms of transparency, accountability, anti-corruption, and so on. Personally, I think also coming from an activist perspective and the hacker culture that is really a different kind of scene. I've been very opening up my mind by meeting whistleblowers, because there you really see people that before were part of the systems, but then they decide to blow the whistle and get a completely different perspective, go outside of these systems. And this is really the moment in which this kind of networks could meet, because in a sense, is a way of seeing society on a similar perspective of trying to provide change, try also to understand how systems could work better and how we could bring all the work together with each other to make a real difference.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful what you're doing. I have to say as well, for most whistleblowers, as you say, they come out from their organizations, be it health or finance or intelligence or whatever it is. And most of us will never have had any experience of having to deal with the media. We are sort of media virgins going in to deal with what can be quite a brutal experience. A lot of journalists, as you say, want the information, they want the stories, and they want the scoops, but then they leave the whistleblower high and dry. And that's where civil society can step in and help them adjust. And also, as you say, if you're coming out of something like, for example, the NSA, someone like William Binney, the former technical director of the NSA, suddenly to be speaking at, for example, hacker conferences, that is a huge turnaround for someone like that. And giving that support is of immense value, I would suggest. But it's interesting, listening to the three of you as well, the idea that whistleblowers, we've all ended up as activists. We've come out of the background in which we worked. We've said what we had to say. We tried to make a difference. We tried to get the media to support us in making a difference, which is very, very difficult to keep them doing long term. So we've gone into activism. And I'm just wondering, one of the key things that's come out of this is the fact that most of us obviously feel a little depressed because no matter what we've done, we haven't affected a major change yet. So I'd like to just try and unpick that a little bit and see what you would all think would be the key vectors in which we could try and affect change more, if we work together more effectively in the future or something like that. Would it be through the media? Would it be through law? I leave the floor open.
Who wants to go? Shall I go, or Coleen, do you want to go first?
Well, I think there's probably the two things you've suggested: legal change and actually reforming the media. Like Glenn Greenwald is trying to do in many of his pieces now. He's trying to model for corporate media what real journalists are supposed to be doing. Edmund Burke, speaking truth to power. You're supposed to not be in bed with the power. Like most of our journalists in the United States, frankly, their sources, secret sources, are high-level public officials that are leaking to them illegally. They're not whistleblowing. They're actually maybe even planting false information, as Scooter Libby did, etc. So these high-level people get green lights to use the media as an ends justify the means to basically manipulate public opinion. And that actually characterizes most of our media. The majority, there's actually very, very few Glenn Greenwald types that are actually trying to do real journalism, where they, like in the old days, as we think, they got their sources from low-level people, whistleblowers, maybe anonymously, but they got information from the lower levels about the truth. So reforming the media is absolutely key, I think. And then, of course, in the United States, as well as the UK, we have those official secrets. We have a form of you have official secrets. The United States has the Espionage Act, virtually the same right now. They've been interpreted virtually the same, which means that publishers like Julian Assange can be prosecuted. And it also means that whistleblowers, there's really no such thing as whistleblower protection under the Espionage Act. So it seems like the reform of that, it's not close right now because, again, the power at the top does not want any reform. They want to be able to control public opinion, and they're too afraid that if they do not make it a crime, that there will be too much information, too much truth getting out. So how do we change that? I don't know, but technically the key changes are very easy. If you give information as a whistleblower for the public good, you at least have to be allowed to defend yourself by explaining, I wanted to save people's lives. You have to be at least able to explain that. If a jury doesn't believe it, fine, but at least you have to be allowed that defense. And then I think in the case of the Espionage Act here, we cannot prosecute publishers. We have a First Amendment right. That's why Jefferson made this First Amendment right, is we were not supposed to put publishers of information in jail. And right now, in all the war fever or whatever, the United States is just turned upside down. I don't know how to fix that. Maybe it has to, I don't know what the answer is.
No, I think you're absolutely right about the media side of things. And also in the UK, they're tightening up the laws around official secrecy to bring them more in line with the ghastly American Espionage Act. So people who blow the whistle from the intelligence agencies potentially will probably face 14 years in prison per charge now, which is the same for treachery, which is crazy.
Submitted evidence on that, calling for whistleblowers in the security services to be given a public interest defence, as a right, an absolute right. You know, it's a battle of, we've tried to learn about whistleblowers from every sector, because the whistleblower deals with whistleblowers from, you know, the army, the police, education, etc. So I deal with that as well as the health. The amazing thing is that it's all going wrong in exactly the same way. We're huge supporters of Julian Assange. We're the only UK whistleblowing organisation that's come out and support Julian from the very beginning. And Chelsea Manning is my heroine. So, you know, we are all the same, and we're all on the same side, and we're all coming at it, you know, from different sectors, but we're all the same. And I says I've always been passionate that you need to get out on the street and get your banners, and we've lined Whitehall and we're in Parliament Square screaming at the top of our voices and having a minute's silence for, you know. So I believe that we have to get out on the street and try to change it. The media, mainstream media, it's very difficult. There's probably 3 journalists in the whole of the UK. There's a lot of good independent media, online media coming in, and I think that's hope. I think as well that social media, there's attempts to try and censor that, and that's a real worry. And I think there's an attack on free speech. In the UK, we're seeing libel laws and threats, and also there's a very unethical element that we get loads of complaints from whistleblowers who've gone to another organisation and they're coming to us, and it turns out that things like child abuse and that kind of serious stuff was not reported. So yeah, we kind of like battle on all fronts, but I think doing the right thing is like you get on a merry-go-round, you can't get off it because you've got on it now, and that's your life now.
But you also as well have been campaigning to try and reform the Public Interest Defence Act from 1998 as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the background to that particular act as well? Why you
we were the first case to use PIDA, and what came out very quickly was the law was written by an organisation called Public Concern at Work. And it was written to rely on policies and procedures in whistleblowing, which are bits of paper and mean nothing in the real world. And so it was written with an idea about compliance being enough to keep you safe. And it wasn't really written for the courtroom. As soon as people started going into a courtroom, you start getting employment specialists, judges. They've got no idea about healthcare issues or auditing accounts or any of the issues that whistleblowers are raising. So you're coming up against this, I suppose it's a system that's trying to keep the disclosures quiet and keep it, secret. In many ways, there's many court cases here where they've set without allowing the press in. So, I think the Employment Tribunal was never the place. It was acting beyond their jurisdiction. One of the things that I see with the UK whistleblowing law and many other laws, including the Official Secrets Act, is it doesn't abide with the rule of law. And we're passionate about the rule of law. And if the rule of law was applied within organisations and across the legal system, we'd actually have a different world. And I couldn't believe when I actually found a book called The Rule of Law and thought, oh my God, there's a judge in the UK who believes in fairness. I couldn't believe it. So I think it's also a question of when you report abuse, we were lucky, but many people, the regulators, they do not act. Safeguarding asks the perpetrators to investigate themselves, so there's all of that issue. We're passionate about trying to change things, and we have the Gavin McFadden Award, which is trying to put up standards in the media and to raise awareness. Julian Assange has won an award in that for the last 3 years, and that's given by whistleblowers. We're going to have the Richard Turner Award, which is about the investigation of wrongdoing. And we're trying to raise standards of investigation with regulators, because a lot of whistleblowers are failed by how investigators react to, the information. So we're trying to raise awareness, and we also believe in naming and shaming, which gets you into no end of trouble. But as well as the best, we believe in highlighting the worst. And that's one of the things I think is needed. I think you have to you have to pretty much chase everything. And I had no idea about whistleblowing across the world, or we have whistleblowers from Spain and Italy and places in Europe. And I had no idea how widespread this thing was when I started. I just thought, if you say something's wrong and it is wrong, that must be it. I was so naive.
I would tend to, well, as I said, we all go into this very, very, yes, Tatiana.
I'm also want to add something related to the discourse of the impact of whistleblowing and the relationship with media, because I think that I totally agree with you that sometimes we really rely on act of activism and we try to make a change that is really fast, and this is not coming very soon. But I believe that change is actually a very slow process and can only be done involving many people in different sectors of societies. So, for example, not only the media, but also, for example, the technical people or the people that are doing films about whistleblowing. I mean, if we see the situation, for example, with Snowden, Laura Poitras, and Glenn Greenwald, we had the wonderful film Citizen 4 or Laura Poitras that for sure also contributed to make change, because many people also in the general public were able to watch it. And I think this kind of transformation of minds is really what we need, because we need also to allow whistleblowing not to be something that is considered as an act of treason, but it's really something that is accepted in society. And I think that also we can not only leave the responsibility of media and journalists, because of course now we are speaking also about sources that have a hold of a very massive amount of leaks and a lot of documents that normal people in a lifetime cannot really process easily. So I think that here we also need the support of people that have technical expertise to create platforms that allow the good way of dealing with these sources, with this material. For example, since we were mentioning what is happening in Italy or other countries, there is a really great organization that is called Global Leaks. They are building up a software that is free and open source, that is enabling whistleblowers and people that want to tell the truth to use a platform that is secure, and they could be anonymous. And at the same time, also the public administration and different companies or organizations could even be able to maintain these platforms to allow also people inside organization to speak out, because I think also this is a matter of changing the mindsets of organization to make them become more ethical, because as you also were saying at the beginning, the idea of whistleblowing is really the regulators of the last resource. So because things are not changing, then you need to blow the whistle. But if the society is already supporting you, and even the organization you are working in allows for people to speak out, then we would not need whistleblowers. So this is also my perspective. I think we have to work in a very different kinds and fields of society, and each of us has to do the parts that is important to do, and that is why we need to connect with the hackers, with journalists, with people that are also having the right technical expertise, not only relied on media and journalists, because I think for them it's also not even possible to process all this data in lifetime, and the pressure is really high also for them. And also, they need to trust media that sometimes they don't want to publish their pieces. Is a very complex situation with a lot of different power mechanism inside.
I think this is why so many of us saw WikiLeaks as the game changer when it first evolved, even before it became notorious in 2010. It was like, why didn't this exist before? It'd be the perfect conduit for any whistleblower, because it gives the whistleblower the power to decide whether or not they come forward and name themselves, but they still get the information out there. And it's wonderful to hear that there are new open source platforms coming out, like Global Leaks, that allow people to protect themselves and protect the data and make sure it gets to the people that are needed. I think, though, from everything the three of you have said, it's also about changing the social perspective, and it's about creating a win-win situation, both for the potential whistleblower and for the organization that they might potentially expose. So if a lose-lose situation, the whistleblower overturns their life and might go to prison, the organization has a scandal on its hands and is embarrassed and loses money or reputation. If you flip it the other way around, of course, you get the win-win where things can be improved internally. So it's almost like we need to try and engender a culture which would build a reward system within different sectors for those who do have ethical concerns, build a proper channel they can go to where things will properly be investigated, not just brushed under the carpet. And I think there is something slightly similar in the financial sector, because I think under American law in 2010, something called the Frank-Dodd Act came into power in America. And that basically encourages whistleblowers coming out of financial organizations to raise concerns. And if those concerns result in reform and potentially the saving of money, the whistleblower from anywhere in the world will get a percentage of that money that is saved. And in some cases, most notoriously, some people have actually been awarded tens of millions of dollars for highlighting these issues. Now, I'm not sure if that counts as whistleblowing because it is very financially motivated, but it certainly corrects the path of a major organization. So in terms of changing the culture within other industries or sectors, it doesn't necessarily have to be money, but it certainly needs to be protection and reputational build-up rather than reputational rape, which is what happens when you become a whistleblower, I think. I don't know if you have any views. Yes, Eileen.
Yeah, we're very anti-bounty. We're very pro awards for detriment that's been caused, but we are pro rewards because most whistleblowers during their court cases and leading up to their court cases are accused at some point of only doing it for the money. And it's part of the discrediting tactics that are used, and they're used widely. The other thing is, it seems to us from the evidence we've gathered, and we've got lots of data coming out next month on this, what whistleblowers want is, well, we've defined the public interest anyway. We've redefined it in the book, There's No Me in Whistleblower, because what's getting lost is the actual disclosures and the wrongdoing, and that's what's getting lost, and that's what matters to the whistleblower most. But we are not pro bounty because, like I say, it's going to cause a public backlash on whistleblowers. And also it's the fact that it's against the rule of law, because you'll get one sector that's rewarded because that information is convenient to the government, and then you'll get whistleblowers, cleaners, drivers lower down, who will basically be reinstated in their job. And most whistleblowers can't go back to their job because they're frightened of what will happen to them. So yes, we are in touch with a lot of US whistleblowers as well. And here we have a lobbying thing going on where we have an American law firm who's currently funding law change in Parliament here. I rang that law firm posing as a whistleblower from a care home, and I said, the company's on the American stock market and there's terrible abuse and people have been hit, etc., etc. And they said, is there any financial abuse? And I said, no. And they said, oh, we can't take your case. I'm really sorry. And I rest my case, and I recorded that, by the way, and I put it to them on a public platform. So I suppose where we're different is we try to confront something. If somebody says to us, this is good or this is bad, we try to test it. And that's what we do all the time. And people say, oh my God, ringing up. I said, well, the reality is, if you're reporting tax fraud and the government have got something to gain from that, they'll love your information and they'll love you and they'll scoop you up and make sure you're all right. But if you're reporting something that the government finds an embarrassment or inconvenient, that's when you're in trouble. And that's what we see all the time.
So I would ask as well, Coleen, picking up on the embarrassment idea, do you have any suggestions on how whistleblowers coming out of the intelligence agencies or within the intelligence agencies could be protected or guarded?
Well, we have laws. They're just not followed.
Sorry, you're very, very quiet. I'm not sure if the volume's gone on your new headset.
We have laws, but they're supposed to. You're supposed to not. The government's not supposed to be able to retaliate for an official whistleblower disclosure as long as you follow the proper procedure. The practical side of it is that those laws are not followed. So I'm going to go back to what Eileen said. You know, I've actually, when people call me up and the same type of thing with a call to me, and I'll say, is there some way that you can find an actual official false statement? Because that was before Frank Dodd. The old Civil War, they passed a law that if someone tries to defraud the government and it's on official paperwork, that you get triple damages. And so if you can peg it to that, that has a chance of success, because again, there's money involved. And so that's my first question. If you can somehow peg it to some benefit or something government, then there's a chance. And by the way, somebody in government might be able to do that. They might actually know of an official falsehood, and that goes back to the Civil War. But even in those cases, our Department of Justice, with Pentagon fraud, for instance, Pentagon fraud is huge. And at a certain point when the war started, they didn't even want to reveal Pentagon fraud, even though that was, you know, that is money involved. So I agree with you. It's otherwise, I think probably trying to go through some official channel. If you realize all the Trump, the Russia gate, the Ukraine gate, those attorneys were trying to use official channels. Mm-hmm. Now they kept from being fired, you know, and they kept from being prosecuted. But a lot of that also is problematic because it depends on what power is behind you in the case of revealing something. If there's a power out there that would agree. So I don't think there's really any good answer. It does depend on the situation. And, you know, if you can find a WikiLeaks type open source thing, maybe that's like the only way to go. But even that, I think, is not completely free of all risk.
Mm-mm. No, I totally agree. I hate to say this because I'd love to carry on chatting for hours, but we are getting very, very low on time. Can I ask the three of you perhaps just to give me a sentence or two on any advice you would give to future whistleblowers? And starting with Tatiana.
I would say for future whistleblowers, they should first really inform themselves of the risks and also try to establish a good network of trust around them so they are not left alone and isolation. And try also to really read well in which way they have to use technology. For example, being able to, you know, use Signal or encrypt the emails, even if now they are even saying that that is not secure anymore. Try to use whistleblowing platforms to be able to be anonymous, and also try to understand what happened before to people that were trying to do the same thing. I think that isolation is really difficult in these situations, and they should really be supported also from all the civil society. So I think it's the responsibility of all of us to keep informing, give literacy on the issue, and also provides a platform of connectivity for people that blow the whistle after they did it.
Wonderful, wonderful. How about Eileen?
Construction workers, blacklisted workers, all different backgrounds, and I think there's strength in numbers. And we give a lot of emotional support to whistleblowers as well, because as Tatiana said, they are isolated and they have good days and they have bad days, and knowing that someone is at the end of the phone. We have volunteers all over the UK, amazing, all whistleblowers themselves, and we call them Edna's Army, because they help other people because we help them and they pass it on. And I think that there's an awful lot of goodwill and good people out there, and we all need to work together. And we say to whistleblowers, you must do what's right for you. There's many ways you can blow the whistle. Sometimes people are too frightened and they'll pass us information which we anonymize and pass on. But, you know, there's many different things you can do according to each case. But I think there's strength in numbers, and I think as well, you know, working with other groups, learning, and also the fact is, if you've got information and that information is secret, you're probably at risk. Once that information is no longer secret, the risk decreases. And I think, so we get that information out, whatever way it takes. And
strength in numbers.
Strength in numbers, yeah.
And, you know, in terms of advising whistleblowers, I think you need to tell them that they need to have a certain amount of stoicism and understand that, you know, somebody like a Daniel Ellsberg who actually prepared himself for going to prison, and, you know, probably Julian Assange. Julian Assange is just as prescient as Ellsberg and probably understood that he was facing this kind of risk. But the problem as a person is, how do you live with not having done something that could have made a difference? And I think that probably is the more serious thing that's facing people as individuals. So preparing people and you know, preparing people that they should be stoic in the face of things that might ramifications is very key.
Wonderful, wonderful. We are out of time, but thank you so much for your wonderful contributions. Tatiana Bazzichelli, Eileen Chubb, Coleen Rowley, thank you very much. And also thank you to all the viewers for joining us at World Ethical Data Forum to discuss the regulators of last resort. Thank you.
Thank you.